Okay, hello, and welcome to this eSchool News webinar, Teacher Shortages, Viable Solutions to Meet Immediate Needs. My name is Kevin Hogan. I am the editor-at-large for eSchool News, and I am happy you're joining us today for what I know will be a very insightful and important conversation. This event is brought to you by Stride, a premier provider of K12 education for students, schools, and districts, which includes career learning services through middle and high school curricula. As part of the larger Stride family, Stride Learning Solutions has partnered with school districts for more than 20 years to collaboratively solve district challenges. Their flexible online and blended learning options boost modern instruction and promote lifelong student success. Before we get to our conversation, I'd like to take a minute to go over some features of the platform that we're using for this webinar. This event is being recorded, so you don't have to worry about missing a thing. Within a few days, you'll receive an email message that contains a link to the recorded webinar, along with a PDF of the slides. If you have a question or comment for the panelists, there is a chat function that you can launch by clicking on that. Feel free to use this feature also to contact someone from within the eSchool News team if you have a technical question. So with these housekeeping items out of the way, let's get started with our conversation and some introductions. First, Laura Spezio. She is the National Account Executive for Stride Learning Solutions. Laura, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And let me pull up a little bit of your bio. Laura joined the Stride team in 2021. She started her career as a classroom teacher outside of Rochester, New York. She transitioned to the ed tech sector, where she is focused on building relationships with school administrators, understanding their complex needs, consulting on viable solutions, and partnering where it's meaningful. In her role at Stride, she manages the Midwest states. Also with us today, Rick Perkins. Rick, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Kevin.
Rick joined the Stride team in early 2022 with a wealth of knowledge from his career as a school leader. He started first as a classroom teacher, moved to the role of Dean of Students, and ultimately became a principal. He then transitioned to being Director of Instructional Operations at Florida Virtual Schools. Under his leadership, the school doubled in size while producing increased academic performance in all measures, including AP scores, completion percentages, and passing rates. And as I know, before the webinar started, Rick and Laura and I were discussing some of the work that they've been doing as we kind of come out of the pandemic here. And I think there's going to be a lot of great insights for our audience. You know, the topic at school districts nationwide are facing unprecedented teacher shortages, with thousands of classrooms unstaffed as the school year begins. And with no end in sight to this crisis, Laura and Rick have been working with these districts to try to fill instructional gaps, utilizing non-traditional teaching and learning methods. A lot of the technologies, that I wrote and spoke about BP before the pandemic for years. I mean, these were all kind of conceptual, esoteric kind of discussions about how we can use these future learning technologies, and really the pandemic turned this into the great beta test, right? To where everyone stopped talking about it in theory and had to begin using it in practice. So before we actually get into the conversation, I want to ask the audience, Chris, if you could pull up the first two poll questions. Number one, is your school district experiencing teacher shortages this school year? I'll suspect a majority of yes, as if, as we sit here, a lot of the reporting I see that there isn't many places in the country that aren't experiencing that. So we'll give a second to answer that. Okay. And then number two, how bad is this teacher shortage experience in comparison prior to the pandemic? Better, same, or worse? And again, I mean, this was something that was an issue even before the pandemic struck. I know that had been an issue, but really, as with many other things, it really just exacerbated and accelerated this issue. Rick, maybe we'll start with you to talk a little bit about your experiences over these past several months and watching the transition. I know Florida Virtual Schools is kind of the granddaddy of a lot of online learning. Did you ever expect to have a global pandemic be an aspect of your work?
Definitely no. Didn't expect to have a global pandemic to be an aspect of my life either. But
Right.
here we are, and and thankfully we're hopefully seeing that we're on the backside of that. It absolutely it was the accelerant for a couple of things. Early on in the pandemic, it made it obvious to schools and school districts around the country that we needed remote options for our students, not only for emergencies like in pandemics, but for traditional school as well, right? A lot of parents that had heard of and maybe they had, I don't know, neighbors or work colleagues that had their students participate in some sort of online schooling, whether it was one class or a full-time school, but they never really conceived of it as an option for themselves, came to understand that maybe this does work for my family. And so we've seen it increase kind of overall in school districts across the country, beginning to offer virtual full-time online programs to students. So that was certainly one thing that came out of the pandemic. But the other thing that came out of the pandemic was, it was really an accelerant or gas on the fire of teacher shortage. Anybody who's been in education, certainly as long as I have, we've seen this coming, right? This has been a trend, across the spectrum, across the country. Teachers leaving the profession via retirement were outnumbering people that were entering the profession. Certainly, our schools of education have seen dips in enrollments over the past decades, and our baby boomers are at that age of retirement, and we've seen states across the country really try to push the issue down the road a little bit by extending retirement ages and offering incentive programs for individuals to stay in the industry longer than they had originally planned. But that, coupled with the pandemic, has really created a crisis that we're seeing now, where school districts are dealing with hundreds, if not thousands, of openings, depending upon the size of the district.
Yeah. So Laura, did Rick's sentiments resonate with your experiences? I know you said you were just out in the district just this past week.
Yeah, so Rick and I are examples of educators that left the classroom, right? We found that in the pandemic, both educators wanted a level of flexibility, and now these schools just came out of a crisis, and we're seeing a lot of them transition into this new crisis mode where they don't have the qualified teachers. So they're trying to do a lot of different things to mitigate this affecting student outcomes, because at the end of the day, anyone who's in the school settings cares about students' safety, their learning, and making sure that they're set up for success. So when we're going in and meeting with districts, we're hearing that they have to increase class sizes, they have to decrease their offerings, they have to find a new way to engage students by giving the teachers the tools necessary to ensure that they're able to do their job. And then we're starting to see departments of education having to change the qualifications or the necessary minimums to have adults in the classrooms. And so now it's a conversation of how do we ensure that the teacher shortage that we're seeing doesn't affect student outcomes, and we have options in place that we can configure to meet every single district's needs. If you're a large urban or a rural district that just doesn't have the reach of available educators.
Yeah, that's one of the things I remember before the pandemic and talking about these sort of technology solutions. The focus was usually on rural areas, right? So I mean, there was that district out in Iowa who couldn't find a French teacher, but were able to set up a remote setup where you had someone from France teaching French in Iowa, right? That was the idea. Now with the pandemic and everyone being at home for those first few weeks and months, do you see specific areas in the country where, there are greater challenges or, for content or great areas? I mean, is it something now that is as important in an urban area as it is in a rural area? Rick, I'll throw that one at you first.
I think it's significantly widespread, Kevin. We're engaging with school districts from across the country in all time zones and in all sizes. We're seeing some examples in larger school districts. Obviously, there is a greater student base, and so there is a larger number of teacher openings that we're hoping to help them fill. But I think everybody is experiencing this to some degree. Larger school districts perhaps in larger numbers, but the one Spanish teacher that you can't find in that school district in Iowa impacts an entire class of high school kids that want to take a foreign language and need that foreign language to be able to go to college. And so it would be difficult for me to say to a parent of that student in Iowa, well, just because it's one Spanish teacher, it's not as important as the, several hundred openings we have in a larger school district. Everything is local and everything becomes personal. And what we really want to do is we want to help schools and school districts put the best possible educational experience in front of their student, regardless of what the situation is. We're really seeing it across all subjects as well. I think schools and school districts are prioritizing, making sure that there is a physical teacher at the elementary school level because they're, because of just the inherent challenges of, working with, 6 and 7 year olds. We want them in a building and we can leverage technology maybe more effectively the older the student gets, but we're seeing it across subject and really across the country.
Yeah. And again, Laura, same.
Yeah, I think most of the conversations tend to be around the core content areas, not because it's strictly to the core content areas, but because they can eliminate elective courses. So if you can't find that one business marketing teacher at your district, that's no longer an option for your students. Not saying that that's not more of a need than the other core courses, but it ends up being, what are the districts being tested on? Where's the state assessment data going to? And then what at the minimum do the students have to be successful? I mean, quite literally, I was on a call with a district in the United States that said, I'm worried some of my high schoolers may not experience a science course in their 9 through 12 grades. I mean, if that's not crazy. Yeah. Sobering, I don't know what is, but that's what it's getting towards. And then, so now they're changing who can be in the classroom, and these schools are finding willing people who will love these kids and go in and fill the person in the room role, but they don't have the instructional knowledge or even the content knowledge to then to share information, ensure students are learning. That's now the next level.
Yeah. Well, this is a good point in time maybe to throw up the other poll questions, Chris. I know they involved the idea of what particular subject matters. So we want to ask the audience, where are you having the most trouble filling positions? Is it in terms of grade levels? And as you answer that, I can give you some of the results from the first two poll questions. 100% of the respondents said that they were having problems with teacher shortages. So from all the polls I've done, I don't think I've ever had 100% before. So that really kind of makes a point on what kind of issue we're dealing with here. And then number two, 56% of the audience said that things are worse than they were before, with only 8% being better. And as you fill out the poll question number 3, we'll go to poll question number 4. So to Laura's points, what type of teaching positions are you having the most trouble filling at the secondary level? So we'll see, and I'll handle those results in a little bit when they come back to me. But let's talk a little bit more about where you both see some solutions. You're implementing solutions. I know there was a lot of conversation at the beginning of the pandemic when it was all fully remote, and some questions that, just wild, mind-bending questions about, will schools return at all? Thankfully, we seem to be coming out of the pandemic here to whatever our new normal is, but there are different varieties of what we then started to call hybrid models, right? Maybe each of you can talk a little bit about like a fully remote setup versus whatever a hybrid setup is. Laura, maybe you can talk a little bit to that first.
Yeah, so after the pandemic, a lot of the feedback we received from district leaders was some families no longer feel it's safe to send their students to the brick and mortar. Some families found this was a better setting for us. Some families need their kid in the brick and mortar. There were so many needs that came out of it outside of COVID, of just these new flexible settings. So when we're talking to districts, it's all around, what is your goal? And the goal usually starts with, we need to ensure our students are successful. And then what are those minimums that you have to have in place for you to be successful? And then we're configuring to every single district. So one district, and we have one that's deployed this and has been successful through the beginning of the year, is having caring adults or facilitators be in the classroom, and their main role is a safety and support, and essentially to love these kids as they come into the classroom. And then we take a highly qualified instructor that may be 3 states over in a different time zone, that is a highly qualified instructor that is craving that flexibility that they received during COVID and wants to maintain it, that's able to then have their sole focus be on making sure they deliver the highest quality content, using data, ensure that their practices are at the highest caliber, and then really engage with these students through technology so that you have a mix of both worlds, right? The fully remote and then students in the classroom. This could be synchronous. The students come into class, the teacher's there, they say, I taught 4th grade, so my message would be, good morning, how's everybody doing? Something like that. It looks a little bit different in high school, as you could imagine, and then goes through their content and then breaks that class period into live instruction, independent work, maybe some small group remediation, things like that, to make sure that the students are getting what they need, versus a fully async where, can you imagine 12 students going into a classroom and every student is doing what they need? Maybe they're retaking biology. Maybe there's a student in AP French who is just so interested in that, and that's why they come to school every day, is because of their interest-based learning there, and deploying these various models to support every student, every district, in every imaginable way that we can guarantee is successful. I don't want to say any way, because Rick is about to talk and he'll tell me, don't go crazy. But in theory, that's what we're doing right now.
So
Yeah,
Rick, what of it?
Yeah, just to piggyback on what Laura said, I think a couple things. We've been, the virtual learning and online instruction and online schools have been in many ways solving for this issue. And we referenced, one example, the Spanish teacher in a rural state, for years, right? Since its inception, we have been able to, to help schools expand libraries, right, to be able to offer courses that they're not able to offer in the building because they don't have the numbers. I'm thinking about my oldest daughter who for 7th period, her senior year took Latin 3 via Florida Virtual School because they didn't, she was the only kid taking Latin 3 in her high school, right? So that in itself is solving for teacher shortage and unit allocations and helping schools through budget constraints, et cetera, right? What we're talking about now is more of a macro, much larger scale, school districts with 100 openings. They're not able to find a certified teacher. We're able to leverage, kind of our national footprint and, state by state reciprocity, et cetera, to be able to recruit nationally because our instructors are working from home, and we're able to use them in a lot of different ways. And many of those ways Laura spoke to, whether it is a remote instruction model, something that those of us that have been in the industry for 18 years could never have conceived of. The technology that we're having this meeting didn't exist when I started in 2004. Synchronous instruction took place over a landline, right? One-on-one, me and a student. Now it's me to many. So we're able to replicate the one-to-many instructional model that we're seeing, in a traditional brick and mortar classroom, and then the one-to-few, the many-to-many, any other model that we can do in a traditional classroom. Technology now allows us to do that with either remote students, which was the pre-pandemic norm, right? Students were home, teachers were home, and we were doing this very same thing to now. Teachers are still home, but students have returned to the building. So what we're seeing more and more, especially this school year, and it's completely understandable, there's this move to normalcy, right? We're trying to make this as normal a school year. I've heard it from superintendent after superintendent. We met with a group of superintendents in Baltimore over the summer, and we heard it from every one of them said the exact same thing. We want the school year to be as normal as we can possibly make it. We want it to be as normal as we can for the kids, which means they're back in school. They're moving from class to class. They're with their peers. But what's missing is the teachers, right? Not all the teachers came back. Many left the traditional school profession for a wide variety of reasons, right? Well, and certainly the pandemic brought a lot of those reasons to the surface. And so this remote instruction model is what we're hearing a lot of from our schools and our school districts. They're like, we want it to be as normal as possible. We're going to put a caring adult in the room with your remote teacher. We're either going to use your content that we have, or we're going to give you access to our scope and our sequence and our curriculum materials, digital and others, and we're going to turn that in, right? And we're going to turn that into, a remote instructional model, right? Where we can do one-to-many, or we can break off into small groups. Anything that you can imagine, we can make come alive using the technology that's now available to us. So that's what we're seeing. We're seeing that across the spectrum, and it's an exciting time because, like you said in the opening, we're finally, we get a chance to take these tools out for a spin and see how we can, not just reopen schools, but as Michael Horn says in his latest book, reinvent it as well. And I'm certain that, that this is the first step, that there are a lot of steps to follow, in terms of the way that we're going to schedule these classes, in terms of, just the overall student experience. We're looking for partners that want to leverage all these technologies and change the way that we run schools and change the student experience coming out of the pandemic. But for right now, we just want to establish some normalcy. We just want kids back in the building and get them with their peers, because we know how important that is, social, emotional learning, etc. And then move forward, and figure out a bunch of new exciting models that we can put in front of students as well.
That's definitely another one of those acronyms that before the pandemic was kind of conceptual and became very, very real quickly, the social emotional learning and the importance of it when we were all suffering this group trauma. So the results from poll question number 3, I find pretty interesting. That's where we asked the different levels of education. So we had 20% responded that the elementary level, but the 80% looked at the secondary level, that high school level. Is that something that goes along with what you see as well, that these sort of solutions, probably as a student gets older, they're more likely to be successfely implemented?
Of course. I mean, literally, we have band directors that are in classrooms right now teaching chemistry. So yeah, 80% from high school is not shocking at all. It's now, how do we help mitigate and not put the burden on the band director, because we don't want the band director to get burnt out at school. We want them to do what they're trained at, and then allow us to come help with the content, the curriculum, and giving the tools that are necessary. And as Rick said, when we came into the profession as educators, we all vowed to forever be students. So as we're looking to partner with districts, we want to learn together, and we want to make sure that we're adjusting, because there's never been one size that fits all in education. And we're not saying that this is either. We want to sit down shoulder to shoulder and truly partner so that we can figure out what's going to best serve their students, their community, their stakeholders.
Yeah, and Rick, talk a little bit about what you see at that secondary level, and actually to get into the specifics of what the classroom looks like. I mean, just from listening to you talk, I mean, we're talking about an auditorium filled with kids who might be speaking with 24 different teachers online, while they just have physical helpers that are just there to kind of keep the peace.
So I'll just speak to one of them, to our latest and kind of largest implementation, where we're in a school district in the middle of the country, in both middle and high school, and we're teaching across the different content areas. And so first I'll kind of describe the student's experience for you, because I think that's where everything starts anyway. The student, has got their schedule, and they're going from first period to second period to third period, and maybe first and second they have a physical, three-dimensional teacher, right, teaching them science and then social studies, but it's time for their English language arts class, and they go into third period, where they will have a classroom facilitator, right, an employee of the school district, working with an employee or a teacher in our organization, right, the state certified English teacher who is remoting in. And so in collaboration, the remote teacher along with the classroom facilitator will manage the classroom. Obviously, the physical space is managed by that classroom facilitator in terms of all of the, kind of the taking of attendance, the handing out of bulletins, etc. All that stuff that, that non-curricular stuff that happens in classrooms every day, kind of getting everybody settled, etc. And then it's the remote instructor who is, either beginning class with a 10 to 15 minute mini lesson, or a review of yesterday's lesson, or whatever, whatever orientation, the lesson plans and the content call for that particular day. And here's where it gets, here's where the partnership is, and is incredibly important. The classroom facilitator and the remote instructor really need to have a really strong partnership, and so we spent a lot of time focusing on that relationship. We spent time before school with those facilitators, meeting with their remote instructor partner, because they play such a critical role. They need to know what's coming tomorrow. They need to know what's coming next week. They need to be, they need access to the content. They need to be able to, to navigate in and around our systems just as effectively as our teachers do, and obviously just as effectively as the students do, right? So we're all on that same instructional team, and so we spend a lot of time, preparing the classroom facilitators, providing training to the classroom facilitators, and building that relationship between the facilitator and our instructor, because without that, the students are not going to remain engaged. There's potential discipline issues, etc. So it's a very important part of what we do. It's just as important. It is a co-teaching model, but in that the classroom management piece, which is incredibly important to a building teacher, right, to be able to manage that classroom, is the number one focus for the classroom facilitator, and then content delivery, content assessment, lesson design, etc., goes towards that remote teacher.
Yeah, Laura, any thoughts on that in terms of the day-to-day and that relationship between the in-person person and then that remote instructor?
Yeah, Rick really nailed it on the head. It's redefining co-teaching. It's no longer two teachers, it's taking the teacher role and breaking it into what a day-to-day teacher does. When I was teaching fourth grade, I was in charge of behaviors, attendance, creating all my lessons, deploying my lessons. I'm duly certified in special ed. It was differentiating my content, right? Like there's so many things a teacher does during the day. And we're defining co-teaching now as the person in the room needs to care for these kids. They need to manage behaviors. They need to be moving around the classroom, checking their screens, making sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. And then the person on the other end of the screen, our instructor, they're in charge of making sure they're using that data to make data-driven instruction. They're making the best possible lesson that they can. They're differentiating their content. They're leaning into the instructional side of teaching to do the very best, and it allows them to focus at a level that I couldn't imagine from my seat as a teacher previously. And then I saw one of the questions in the Q&A was, okay, but we're talking about a teacher shortage, so how do you fill the role of that caring individual? And it's been such a blessing to see the ability to hire for this role and the caliber of humans who are coming into the schools just caring for the kids. They care about their community. They care about the kids. They want them to be successful. And right now, in just one of the districts we're working with, they've filled 98% of the facilitator roles. They have one open position, and they found people who just are willing to love these kids. And since all they have to have is minimal level of qualifications, it opens up a much wider pool than looking for a state certified instructor in a specific content area.
If I could
So
just,
yeah, go ahead.
if I could just comment, because because we're talking about the solving the problem for today, right? Which is we're school's open and we don't have the requisite inventory of certified teachers to take care of our kids, right? But think beyond the problem today and think about the problem 5 years from now, right? This model is bringing individuals into the education space that may not have had access to the education space. And think about the ramifications or the possible downstream positive takeaways that that they this is something that I might want to do for a living. Let me go back to school, let me get credentialed as a teacher. Well, I mean, we were in the school district. I met 15 of the classroom facilitators who are if they were graduates of schools of education, I would be hiring them today, right? So think about partnerships with schools of education and putting pre-service college students or individuals in these classrooms to get them that experience of classroom management while working with a certified teacher remotely. We all know the power of the technology that we're using right now, the relationships that we're able to build with our colleagues, ones that we may never see physically, and just think about, play that tape out to the end and what an impact that we can have on the industry in general by leveraging this type of a model.
But yeah, but you also have, when I think about the 15,000 plus school districts and the way that we've always done it, and when you bring in the idea of certification requirements in many states and in many districts, I know some teacher unions have some issues and some institutional, let's say, challenges in terms of the way that they might not necessarily want to engage in new models like this. Do you see that as being one of the biggest challenges, is one of perception and maybe just kind of human behavior when it comes to the administration of schools?
I think I think you have that anytime you're doing anything that's new, anything you're doing, anytime that you're doing anything that's outside of the outside of the quote unquote norm, right? Education is one of those unique industries in which we're all experts in. We've all had at least 13 years experience in.
That's right.
And so, right. And we all, I mean, that's a lot of, a major part of our life was spent in schools, and we have a conception of what school was supposed to look like. Okay. So for me, it's no different than when I would speak in, at conferences in 2006, 2007, talking about online PE. Well, how is that possible? How are you able to teach physical education online, right? That I don't have that question asked of me anymore. And so I think this is another one of those examples. So you're going to have you're always going to have those barriers, those obstacles, and it's up to courageous school leaders and school boards and legislators and et cetera to break down those barriers and reinvent what we're doing. And let's right, and let's build this around student needs and and not so much everything else. And then I think we'll find our way.
Yeah. And speaking of the students, Laura,
Yeah.
What about their behaviors? Is this something now, because they are COVID kids and have had this experience, as that they're maybe they're more likely to kind of go along with this sort of setup than the teachers and administrators who always remember what happened before the pandemic? Talk a little bit about how you see students adjusting to this, being back in school, but still having some sort of hybrid learning experience.
Well, let's talk about students today. Students today have access to technology. Students today grew up with technology. Students today can do all these things that I still haven't completely figured out, and you would think that I could do those things. But students today are well equipped to join a virtual class, to ask questions. They are inherently already comfortable with this level of technology. So just using it in a different way. Instead of watching Reels or TikToks, they're watching the playlist of the sequence of resources that the teacher built out for them. Instead of commenting on a post, they're commenting on a Q&A session similar to ours with their students in their classroom. So for the students' perspective, we're always concerned about how are they doing emotionally, how are they doing socially, how are they doing in the classroom, moving from class to class, all of that. And that's why we need that facilitator so much when we're deploying a model in the brick and mortar setting. But then as for how do they communicate with the instructor, the concern for their ability to engage at a high level, have that interactivity, is less of a concern because we've seen it come so naturally to them. And then we can find the individual students that need additional support and go in and help them as we would in any other setting. Differentiation has been a huge part of education for years now. And so that looks the same if they're remote, if they're virtual, if they're hybrid, if they're whatever new terms we're going to use to describe what learning is going to look like in the future. It all comes down to how do the school leaders want to support these students, and then we'll figure out a way to support them.
Well, we obviously have a very tech savvy audience here because they are using the tools to ask some interesting questions. One that just came in: how do you see pay and qualifications impacting hiring? And if a teacher can make more money in a less skilled position or less demanding or more time flexible, talk about, you spoke a little bit about that a little bit earlier, but maybe go in a little deeper and talk about how these tools can affect the way that the teachers can work remotely and impact their pay and work style. And
well,
Rick,
I don't know.
I'll drop that one on you first.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. I'll solve the teacher pay issue. So we can never, first say that, there is no, we cannot pay teachers enough. And, and I am a teacher by trade. I'm married to a teacher, and my oldest child is going to be a teacher. So, so I say that, from a very personal place. So I don't know the answer to that. Right. So I'm not, I don't know how we solve for that. But what I do know is that pay is one of the driving factors for educators leaving the profession. And so, communities across the country are going to have to figure that out, and they're going to, and that will be a strategy. And we've seen that strategy in some pockets across the country where, whether it's through bonuses for, to bring new teachers into the profession. I know in my state, they've increased the first year pay across the board, to attract more first year teachers, and, all with a design on, solving this, this current teacher shortage crisis that we're in, right? There are still other factors that drive teachers from the profession, but they want to stay engaged in education. They're educators by nature. So, that's where working in a virtual environment, right, in an online environment is attractive, and it's, and it's how organizations like ours or virtual charter schools across the country are able to attract teachers, because there are a lot of stuff that that kind of goes along with running a school, that gets in the way of the reason why we became educators, the ability to work with students and see them grow and see them, learn, and the light bulb moments, they get pushed to the background while we're asking teachers to do a lot of things, duty wise and etc. administrative, that kind of gets in the way of all of that. And and teaching online, strips a lot of that away. Okay, so I don't know that doesn't address the pay issue, but it does address maybe the quality of the experience issue, right? We don't have to worry about that other stuff, and we can just focus on, I can just focus on making sure that my kids, understand the elements of a short story and understand how to construct a 5-paragraph, argumentative essay, and I don't have to worry about the other stuff. And that's what's attracted a lot of teachers to virtual schools and to online learning. Certainly, I want to pay everybody more. I think we all know that teachers are underpaid, but absent a national solution there, I think providing them the best possible work environment is also a very important thing. And I think that we're able to do that in virtual and online learning.
Yeah, one question. Well, Laura, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I saw a follow-up
To the
to that
question.
question was, how do we convince districts to be more competitive? And everything that Rick's just said was completely spot on. But when we talk about how do we make districts become more competitive, some of that just comes down to making sure they have the tools in place to do their job. Can they have the high quality curriculum? Are they able to reach their kids? Are they logging into so many different logins and different resources that don't talk? Some of it just comes down to making sure they have what they need to do their job. And so that's a big thing that we focus on too, is, do we have teachers? Yes. Can we deploy teachers today for districts across the United States right now? Yes. But another conversation is, okay, so we have these teachers, you have a need, how do we make them successful? Let's talk about the tools in which your teachers are going to be using. How are they going to communicate with the teachers? What is the level of curriculum and connectivity that they have, and all of that, to ensure that, yes, you have the need, we have the teachers, now how do we make it work? And sometimes it just comes down to tools. And that's a complex issue, right? Convincing districts to be more competitive, that has so many layers to it, but that can be one piece.
Let's talk another question. This is great. Really lively audience, so I appreciate that. Let's talk about the timing for these things, and the timing of you being able to go in and work with the district. What is the timetable for putting these sort of solutions in place? So, if, for example, the district needs teachers today, how would you be able to help them out?
Laura, do you want to take that one first, or you want me to go?
I can start. So if a district has a need today, the first thing is we need to start the conversation right now. And the conversation looks like, tell me where your needs are and what model you're envisioning. Once we have an idea of what they're looking for, then we can start to set the minimums in place to take a consultative approach to ensure that we have a clear stepping stone, a clear scope of work to get us from A to B, because the way that we deploy Rick Perkins School of Fantastic and the way we deploy your school is going to look a little different. So I can't give you one timeline. I can say we have teachers available. And then once we start with that conversation, we'll set milestones in place to ensure that we're on the right track and we get that teacher in front of students as soon as we can ensure that they're going to be successful, to ensure that they are rostered with students, that they have access to anything they need to ensure that they've been trained in anything that we know that they're going to need to be successful. So, I mean, that looked like August 5th to August 22nd this summer, and that may look like a little bit longer depending on your district. So don't quote me on a certain number of days, but we can do it and we're willing to do it. And the timeline honestly ends up being, we'll run as fast as the district wants to run. Rick's actually a great sprinter, so he's going to take the question next.
Yeah, sure. But everything Laura said is 100% correct. It is very model dependent, and then also, what kind of preparation do we have already in place, right? So, it could be days. We could turn it around, and we have. Depends upon the scale, of course, right? So let's go back to the beginning of this conversation. The district that lost its Spanish department, or right, we can stand that up in days. 100, the district that lost half of its middle school is going to take a little bit longer, but we have the teachers, but then there's the infrastructure that has to be built around there, right? There's a master schedule at the school level that we need to be able to plug into. We got to, we got to make sure that, there are, kind of those logistics and infrastructure, plug and, that's not always plug and play, believe it or not, there are rooms in a building that get better Wi-Fi than other rooms. It's that type, it's to that level of detail, making sure that, that we're literally working through an implementation checklist to give the students the best possible experience that they can get. And I'm smiling when I say that because we've had to move from one side of the building to the other very recently, because of just that. Nobody thought about, hey, well, shoot, room 205 doesn't quite stream as well as room is right across the hallway. So we needed to, we can physically move kids across the hallway for a better internet experience. There's all types of those kind of things that, that have to be taken into consideration, but it's, dependent upon, the situation that we're going into, it's days that we can turn it around.
Absolutely. Now let's talk a little bit about, again, another question coming in from the audience about certifications and requirements. And have you run into situations where districts need their remote teachers to be actually in the state based on requirements or other certification requirements? And again, maybe even some union requirements on what sort of instructors you have, even if they are virtual.
So we found, not every state's the same, right? And so there are complexities, that are unique to certain states in terms of reciprocity, but by and large, we're able to, and especially now, I think departments of education across the spectrum understand, that they understand the climate that we're in, the situation that we're in, with needing certified teachers in front of kids and et cetera. And so they're able to work. I think, they've loosened up some of the additional requirements that they put on teachers who are certified. I'm from Florida. So with my Florida certification, to go get a certification in the state of Michigan is fairly simple. For me to go get my certification in Pennsylvania, not so much. I have to go to Pennsylvania and sit for the exam. They'll give me a 1-year certificate, but then I have to go and actually sit there, that kind of stuff. So, but by and large, the overwhelming majority of states, it is not a challenge to get certified, and we're able to leverage those reciprocity agreements, to be able to, to take teachers that, that live in Georgia and hold a Georgia English certification, get them certified in Missouri, et cetera. Not sure if that addresses the specific question around certification, but that's the landscape that we're
right. So neither of you have seen it as a game ender in terms of a district not being able to get teachers because of the certification. Maybe something else the pandemic helps alleviate is a lot of unnecessary sort of requirements such as that, right?
We're not confined to geographic space, so, a small, or not even small, a medium-sized school district in the middle of the country's pool is limited to those that are willing to, that are there, right, within a certain geographic radius. Whereas organizations like ours are not limited by that geographic radius, where we have a national scope and we can leverage reciprocity to get teachers certified in whatever state we need them to get certified in. More importantly, whatever state the customer needs us to get certified in. Yeah.
So another question coming in, kind of surrounding professional development and teacher training. Attendee writes, time is one of the most important factors to teachers. Hearing they have to do yet more training while still having to do their daily work. How do you help them prioritize, integrate, and give them the support to do both as they move into this new sort of phase? Laura, I'll throw that one at you first.
I think the most important part of that question is prioritizing, right? We understand teachers have so many things that they're juggling during the day. So it starts by saying, what is the goal that we're getting at? And what are the first few things that need to get done? And then deprioritizing things that aren't necessary. FERPA training is always going to have to be done initially. And then let them start the school year, and then we'll lean into the data-driven instruction, how to pull various reports, and what different details we're going to be looking at to ensure that we have artifacts of their learning, and that we're challenging the students who need it, and we're accommodating the students who have additional needs and things like that. So it all starts by taking, where are we going, what's most important, and then creating a plan that's based on just their threshold and what they're going to be able to take, right? Beginning of the school year is always the hardest, especially if your school year has already started, there's a teacher deficit, and you have students who have missed the first month of content. So then we'll be looking at that and saying, okay, where do we start? What's most important? And create a plan, and understand that the plan is not a one size fits all, like we've said throughout this conversation.
So we have a unique instructional delivery, obviously, in the virtual and online space, whether it's remote instruction or fully 100% asynchronous. And so the teachers that work for us, that we're deploying in schools across the country, have gone through our really, comprehensive, virtual teacher training, onboarding and ongoing mentorship, with our veteran staff. And then, so, we walk into relationships with school districts, with trained, highly certified, highly qualified teachers that are experts in their space, that, virtual and remote instruction. And then we'll work with we work with the schools and districts to make sure that we're, that we're helping them be compliant to any, regulatory professional development that their teaching staff, goes through, whether it's, cybersecurity and, child welfare, et cetera, so that we can help them be compliant, because that's an important part of, running a school and a school district. But the ongoing professional development that we provide, is geared around, producing expert online, virtual, remote teachers. And that's, that's something that we're uniquely positioned to be able to offer.
Another question, what is the youngest age group that instruction is available for? Do you have any sort of preschool or pre-K remote instruction? Laura?
Rick,
I'll let Rick take that one.
Oh, all right.
So yeah, we're K12 plus. right. So we have many partner school districts that, that are, that we're providing K-5 instruction. We have really tremendous suite of courses at the K-5 level, and a really sound instructional model. That was and this shouldn't surprise anybody in the webinar today, that was the largest area of growth, not only for us, but for everybody across the industry, right, the K-5 space. And I think a lot of families realized that, or a lot of families came out of the pandemic realizing this is really this works for us. This works for us in our home. Kids are really making some terrific strides. This just works for us. And so we're seeing there has been a stickiness around enrollment numbers in K-5. I think we'll continue to see that increase over time as more and more parents, realize it's not only a viable option, but the best option for their students.
Right. Let me ask one other question about in terms of the timing, when you talk about the in-classroom instruction, are students able to reach the remote teachers outside of what we would think of as the traditional classroom hours? Talk a little bit about, again, another one of these phrases I remember before the pandemic, always on learning, right? Anytime, anywhere. And it was this concept. Well, now we're in it, right? Talk a little bit about what's happening almost kind of from that extracurricular standpoint.
So some of that is model dependent. Sorry, Laura, I'll be quick, I swear. Some of that is model dependent. The more we replicate the school day, then there's a give and take there, right? For a teacher to be, kind of a brick and mortar teacher, but in a remote environment, following the bell schedule, doing what we're doing right now, but for five periods a day, it limits their opportunity to, to provide the more, and this is funny for me to say, the more traditional virtual or online instructional model, right? I'm old enough to remember when this wasn't traditional. So, so there is that kind of given, there is that kind of give and take, but we also wrap around additional, services, for students, especially those that are in our ecosystem that are using our content. We have 24 hour, 7-day week academic support, where students can call in and get help, if they're working on their assignments at 8 o'clock at night, after dinner, we've got folks that they can tap into and get help. Laura, what were you going to say?
Exactly that. It goes beyond the classroom, right? We want to make sure that these students are surrounded by supports, if it's just having books at their level, or if it's a true academic support team that they can call or chat when their parent comes home from third shift and they didn't actually finish their homework, but they're up eating snacks. I'm giving you quite the visual that you didn't ask for, but they need help. We have a team for that because we heard that it was necessary, and we deployed resources to that so that they could go to school all day and they could have support when they get home too, to make sure that we can say we're doing everything in our power to ensure the students that partner with us are going to be successful.
Yeah, that's great stuff. I see that our time is just about up, so I'm going to wrap things up here. I'd like to thank Rick and Laura, our presenters today, for a very informative presentation. And I'd like to thank all the audience members for joining us as well. As a reminder, you'll get an email within the next few days that contains a link to this recording along with the slides. Thanks again for participating, and have a great day. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Kevin.